"May I have your leftovers, ma'am?" But when the millionaire looked into his eyes, a miracle happened. The city was alive, but in a way that felt indifferent. Lights glowed in towering buildings. Billboards flashed advertisements for things most people could never afford, and cars hurried past as though the world depended on their speed. On one side of a bustling avenue stood a restaurant where crystal chandeliers cast golden light over polished tables. Inside, the air shimmered with warmth, laughter, and the rich aroma of freshly cooked meals. Outside, only a few feet away, a man sat against a stone wall, his back pressed to the cold surface as though it were the only thing holding him upright. His appearance was worn, the kind of worn that couldn't be mistaken for anything else. The jacket he wore was once brown, but had faded into an indistinguishable shade somewhere between gray and dust. Its seams had long since surrendered, exposing cotton stuffing in thin streaks. His trousers sagged loosely, creased and threadbare, clinging stubbornly to his legs as if they feared being discarded like everything else in his life. His shoes, cracked at the soles and frayed at the edges, were barely functional, their only purpose now to shield his feet from the harsh grit of the street. His body carried the marks of neglect. His hands were calloused, the skin thick and uneven, with small cuts that never healed because there was no clean water, no ointment, no time to tend to them. His hair hung low and unkempt, strands matted from sweat and dust, while his beard, grown wild, framed a face hollowed by hunger. His eyes, though sunken, burned with a restless light, as if a hidden flame refused to die no matter how merciless the winds of hardship blew against it. The night was sharp and biting. Each gust of wind crept into his jacket, gnawing at the thin fabric until it pierced through to his skin. His stomach twisted painfully, the gnawing ache rising in waves that left him lightheaded. It had been nearly 2 days since he last tasted something more than scraps from trash bins, and even those had been stale, sour remnants that barely qualified as food. Hunger had become a constant companion, an ache so familiar that it now lived inside him like a second heartbeat. Yet he sat in silence, never raising his voice to beg. There was a quiet dignity in the way he endured his suffering, as though some invisible thread held him together, preventing him from completely collapsing. He observed the world without complaint, watching as well-dressed patrons entered and exited the restaurant, their laughter spilling into the night along with the fragrance of spiced meats, buttered bread, and sweet confections. Each time the door opened, the aroma reached him. It teased his senses, awakened memories of meals long past, and fueled the gnawing emptiness inside. His body yearned to move, to step forward, to reach out, but he remained still, restrained by the invisible weight of pride, shame, and the knowledge of how the world often responded to people like him, with avoidance, with disgust, with indifference. Hours passed. The crowds thinned as the evening waned, but he did not move. His eyes, steady yet weary, remained fixed on the restaurant door, as though salvation might walk out at any moment. People glanced at him as they left, their faces flickering with brief recognition before quickly hardening into the practiced blindness of the privileged. Some whispered to companions and hurried away. Others didn't even bother to turn their heads. To them, he was not a man, but an obstacle, something to sidestep on their way to a warm car and a comfortable home. And still he waited. There was no sound from him, no gesture, no desperate hand reaching forward. Only his presence, silent, unmoving, and haunting. The kind of presence that unsettles even the most hardened conscience because it forces one to confront a reality they would rather forget. Then, as the restaurant's final patrons began to trickle out, she appeared. She moved with a poise that set her apart from the others who had passed before. Her figure was tall, her steps measured, her presence commanding without being loud. A chestnut glow shimmered through her hair beneath the street lamp, catching hints of auburn with each sway. She was dressed simply but elegantly, her coat tailored perfectly, her shoes polished but not ostentatious. In her hand, she carried a bag, the subtle imprint of the restaurant's logo pressed across its surface. Unlike the others, she didn't rush past him. She didn't lower her gaze or quicken her pace. Her stride slowed as she neared, as though something unseen tethered her attention to the man at the wall. Her eyes, keen, thoughtful, and searching, swept over him with a depth that most passers-by never allowed themselves. The moment stretched as their eyes met. His gaze rose reluctantly, almost timidly, drawn to hers by a force he couldn't explain. There was no expectation in his stare, no demand, only the raw reflection of a soul worn thin by hardship. Yet within it lingered something more, something that stirred in her as surely as it lived within him, a quiet resilience, a refusal to be extinguished. For her, that look was piercing. It was not the vacant stare of despair she had grown accustomed to seeing on the city's forgotten faces. It was something sharper, deeper, a story carved into the hollow of his cheeks, the lines of his forehead, the heaviness of his posture. His silence spoke louder than words ever could, reaching into the part of her heart she usually kept guarded, even from herself. She paused, standing before him, the world around them blurring into irrelevance. The honking cars, the neon lights, the murmurs of the city, all of it faded, leaving only the quiet gravity of this unexpected moment. The distance between their worlds, her life of abundance, his life of absence, was suddenly bridged by something intangible and profound. The bag in her hand weighed differently now. What had been leftovers a few minutes ago became, in that instant, a lifeline, a symbol of choice. She could walk on, as so many had done before her, or she could stop, acknowledge him, and alter the trajectory of not only his night, but perhaps his entire life. Her breath lingered in the cold air as she considered the man before her. She saw not just hunger but potential, not just poverty but humanity. She saw a mirror of struggles she had once known, though hers had ended differently, with fortune lifting her from the depths rather than dragging her down further. The city pulsed around them, alive yet indifferent. And there, in the silent exchange of a gaze, something unseen stirred, an invisible seed of change, waiting to take root. This was no ordinary encounter. It was the beginning of something neither of them could have foreseen, a quiet spark that would ripple outward in ways that would defy explanation. Her fingers tightened ever so slightly around the paper bag, its warmth still radiating faintly through the cardboard, as though holding the essence of the feast she had just left behind. Steam escaped in soft curls, rising into the cool night before dissolving into nothingness. The man's eyes followed the motion instinctively, his body betraying a yearning he dared not voice. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Pride stood in the way, tangled with exhaustion, keeping him rooted in silence. She lowered her gaze briefly to the bag, then back to him. A thought pressed against her chest. What if she simply offered it? To many, it would be a trivial act, barely remembered by Dawn. But she knew better. She had lived long enough to understand that moments of compassion, however small, could carve permanent marks on the soul, both the givers and the receivers. And so she stopped. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement as she stepped closer, bridging the chasm that so many had chosen to widen. Her shadow mingled with his on the wall behind him, as though their lives, for this brief interval, were joined in an intimate dance choreographed by fate itself. He straightened slightly, surprise flickering across his tired features. No one had approached him in this way before, not with such stillness, such deliberate care. The streets had taught him to expect only hurried glances or harsh dismissals. Yet here she was, standing before him as though his presence mattered. The city around them seemed to hold its breath. The hum of engines dimmed in his ears. The chatter of late-night passers-by faded to background static. All that remained was the soft rustle of the bag and the rhythm of her breathing, steady and calm. She bent slowly, lowering herself to his level, not entirely crouching, but enough so that their eyes aligned, equal and unguarded. And in that alignment, an unspoken dialogue began. Her gaze held no pity, no condescension. Instead, it shimmered with recognition, as though she were seeing not a stranger in rags but a man with a story, a history, a soul that had weathered storms most would never know. For a fleeting second, memories rushed to her. Nights spent wondering if she would have enough for her next meal. Days when the world seemed cruelly indifferent to her efforts. Moments when the kindness of one stranger had been the only rope keeping her from slipping into despair. Though her life now was gilded with wealth and comfort, those memories had never truly left her. They had carved her into who she was. She extended the bag toward him. The gesture was small, yet in the hush of the moment, it felt monumental. He hesitated. His hands, rough and trembling, lifted slightly, then faltered in midair. Accepting meant surrendering pride. Accepting meant admitting need. And yet, refusing meant clinging to suffering when relief was inches away. The conflict raged within him, written plainly in the furrow of his brow and the tautness of his jaw. His eyes flicked between her face and the bag, as though searching for judgment, waiting for the cruel sting of mockery that had so often followed moments like this. But none came. Only her steady patience, her quiet encouragement, her unwavering willingness to see him. Slowly, his fingers reached out. They brushed against the paper, tentative at first, then firmer as he drew it closer. The warmth seeped into his palms, spreading through his body like a fragile promise of comfort. He whispered something under his breath, barely audible, a murmur carried away by the restless city wind. Whether it was thanks or apology, she could not tell, but she heard the weight of it, felt the sincerity of it, and knew it mattered. For him, the bag was not merely food. It was acknowledgement, proof that he was not invisible, that his suffering was not unnoticed. It was, in some inexplicable way, a fragment of his dignity restored. She stood slowly, her movements graceful, unhurried. The night air caught her hair, lifting strands in a gentle dance. She looked down at him once more, offering a faint smile, not wide or showy, but tender, the kind of smile that lingers in memory long after it is gone. And then she turned, beginning to walk away. Yet as her steps carried her forward, something within her resisted. A strange pull tightened in her chest, urging her not to let the moment end here. It wasn't enough. She couldn't simply give a bag of leftovers and vanish into the night. Something about his eyes, the quiet resilience beneath the hunger, haunted her even now. She slowed her pace, each footfall echoing like a question in her mind. What if this encounter was meant for more than a fleeting act of charity? What if destiny itself had orchestrated their crossing paths tonight? The thought refused to leave her. And with every passing second, the certainty grew stronger. This man's story was not meant to fade into the shadows. Not tonight. Not ever. She stopped, her figure framed against the glow of a lamppost, her shadow stretching long across the pavement. The city surged on, unaware, but for her, time had narrowed to a single choice. She turned back, and in that turning, the course of both their lives quietly shifted, like the unseen hand of fate guiding them toward a miracle neither could yet imagine. She retraced her steps, each one deliberate, until she stood before him once more. The man had lowered his gaze, clutching the bag as though it were a fragile treasure that might vanish if he loosened his grip. His shoulders, hunched from years of bearing invisible weights, curved inward protectively around it. He didn't notice her return at first, lost in the strange mixture of relief and shame that came with being seen. When her shadow fell over him again, he lifted his head in confusion. His brows furrowed slightly, as though he thought she had forgotten something or perhaps made a mistake. But when he saw the calm steadiness in her expression, his confusion deepened into something else. Bewilderment mingled with a quiet flicker of hope. She spoke then, not with words, but with a simple motion. Her hand reached out, not toward the bag this time, but toward him. A gesture of invitation, of possibility. It was as if she were silently saying, "Come with me. Stand. There is more for you than this corner, this night, this hunger." His chest tightened. He had lived too long with disappointment to trust easily, too long with broken promises to believe in gestures so open and unguarded. His instinct was to retreat, to curl back into the safety of invisibility. Yet the earnestness in her eyes held him fast. For a long moment, they remained in stillness. Her hand extended, his body torn between the urge to recoil and the pull to rise. And then, with a tremor that shook not just his hands but the very core of his being, he placed his palm in hers. Her grip was firm, steady, grounding. She helped him to his feet. He staggered at first, his legs stiff from hours of sitting, his balance uncertain. But she steadied him with the quiet strength of someone who had borne her own storms and survived them. Together, they began to walk. The streets stretched wide before them, a river of asphalt illuminated by lamps casting cones of yellow light. The city was restless still. Cars hissed over wet pavement. Voices echoed from distant alleys. The faint strains of music drifted from a bar on the corner. Yet for them, the world narrowed to the sound of footsteps, hers brisk and even, his faltering but determined. Pedestrians glanced as they passed, their eyes lingering on the contrast between the two figures, the woman in her elegance, the man in his tattered clothes. Some whispered behind cupped hands. Others simply stared with thinly veiled disapproval. But she didn't falter, and with her hand clasped firmly around his, neither did he. The restaurant lights faded behind them as they turned onto a quieter street. Here, the air carried the mingled sense of damp brick and distant rain. Their steps echoed differently, less drowned by traffic, more intimate, as though the city itself were listening. His heart pounded, not from exertion but from uncertainty. Where was she leading him? Why had she not turned away like the others? Questions swirled in his mind, tangled with gratitude, suspicion, and the fragile spark of hope. They stopped before a small cafe, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. Golden light spilled out, carrying with it the comforting aromas of brewed coffee, fresh bread, and melted butter. Though it was late, a few patrons lingered at tables, their quiet conversations blending into a hum that felt softer, kinder than the harsh rhythm of the streets. She opened the door, the small bell chiming overhead. Warmth rushed to greet them, banishing the chill of the night. The man hesitated at the threshold, uncertain whether he belonged in such a place, but her hand remained on his, guiding him across the invisible barrier that had kept him outside for so long. The staff looked up. A waiter, young and slightly weary, blinked at the sight of the pair. His eyes flickered toward the man's ragged clothes, the dirt on his hands, the weariness etched into his posture. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though he might protest. But the woman's presence, her quiet authority, her unwavering poise, silenced whatever doubt lingered in his mind. He offered a polite nod instead and gestured toward an empty table near the corner. They sat. The man lowered himself gingerly onto the chair, his body stiff as though afraid it might break beneath him. The table felt foreign, almost intimidating in its cleanliness and polish. He placed the bag on his lap, clutching it as though it were still his only lifeline. She signaled to the waiter, who approached with menus. She didn't glance at hers, simply ordering with ease, her voice calm and assured. Soups, bread, warm dishes meant to comfort, not impress. The waiter scribbled quickly, then left them in silence once more. For the first time since the night began, the man dared to meet her gaze directly. His lips parted, but the words tangled in his throat, trapped between gratitude and disbelief. He wanted to ask why. Why her? Why now? Why him? But when he saw her expression, he realized the answer wasn't meant to be spoken. It was written in the quiet kindness of her eyes, the way she carried herself, the steadiness with which she saw him not as less, but as simply human. The food arrived, steam curling upward in delicate tendrils. The aromas filled the space between them, rich and overwhelming. His stomach clenched painfully at the sight, but he waited, hands trembling slightly as he reached for the spoon. The first sip was almost unbearable in its beauty. Warm broth slid down his throat, igniting forgotten sensations, soothing the ache that had become his constant companion. His eyes closed involuntarily as he savored it, as though he were rediscovering what it meant to be alive. She watched, not intrusively, but with quiet satisfaction. There was no triumph in her gaze, only a deep, resonant empathy. For her, this was not charity, it was restoration. As he ate, slowly at first, then with growing urgency, the cafe around them faded again into a blur of soft lights and muted voices. There was only this moment, a man long forgotten by the world being reminded of his worth, and a woman who had chosen, against the tide of indifference, to see him. And though neither spoke, something profound unfolded in the silence between them. It was the kind of silence heavy with meaning, the kind that wrapped itself around two souls and began to weave threads of destiny. When the meal was nearly done, he set the spoon down with trembling hands. His chest rose and fell, not just from the satisfaction of fullness, but from the weight of emotions he could no longer contain. He looked at her, his voice finally finding its way past the barrier of silence. And though his words were few, she knew their impact would ripple far beyond this small cafe, far beyond this single night. The night outside had grown colder, but inside the cafe, a quiet warmth lingered, wrapping around them like a fragile shield against the harshness of the world. The man's hands still trembled slightly, not from hunger anymore, but from the weight of the realization that someone had truly seen him. He glanced down at the bag she had carried earlier, still resting beside him, now largely forgotten. The food had nourished more than his body. It had rekindled something deeper, a spark he thought had been extinguished long ago. She remained seated across from him, her posture relaxed yet purposeful, radiating calm. Her eyes followed him, not in judgment, but with a steady curiosity, as though she were witnessing a slow and delicate awakening. Every bite he took, every shiver of relief passing through him, seemed to etch itself into her memory. She understood, instinctively, that tonight was not just a meal. It was a bridge between two lives that had long run parallel yet separate. As the cafe's muted music played, he began to recount fragments of his life, his voice low and cautious at first. He spoke of days when work had provided dignity, of nights spent laughing with friends who no longer existed in his world. He spoke of loss, of doors closed before he could even knock, of the relentless erosion of opportunity and trust. Each sentence trembled with emotion, each pause heavy with the weight of experiences that had nearly crushed him. She listened, letting him speak without interruption, offering only the occasional nod or subtle smile that encouraged him to continue. In her presence, he found no condescension, no pity, only a quiet acknowledgement of his humanity. And slowly, imperceptibly, the tension in his shoulders began to ease, the fear that had coiled within him loosening its grip. Outside, the wind rattled against the windows, a reminder of the world beyond this small sanctuary. But within, The space had transformed into something rare and sacred, a place where judgment did not exist, where one could be seen simply for being alive. He realized, in the deepest corners of his being, that this encounter was more than chance. It was as if the universe had orchestrated their meeting to remind them both of forgotten truths, that compassion has the power to heal, that dignity can be restored, and that miracles sometimes arrive disguised in ordinary gestures. She reached into her coat and produced a small notebook, scribbling something quickly before sliding it across the table to him. He glanced at it, confusion knitting his brow, only to find a series of numbers and instructions, a phone number, a street address, an offer of work. He lifted his eyes to meet hers, and for the first time that night, a flicker of disbelief danced across his face. The world had rarely offered him more than crumbs, yet here was a lifeline extended without hesitation, without expectation, without judgment. His gratitude threatened to spill over, but words felt insufficient. Instead, he nodded slowly, absorbing the enormity of what had been given to him. Every detail mattered, the careful choice of words, the deliberate calm in her eyes, the undeniable certainty that she believed he was capable of more than mere survival. For him, this was a moment suspended in time, a pivot upon which the trajectory of his life could shift. The woman watched silently, aware of the fragile hope now growing within him. She understood that the real gift was not simply employment or food, but the affirmation of his worth, the gentle hand guiding him back toward a life he had once known and had almost forgotten. She recognized that this was a turning point, not just for him, but for herself as well, a reminder that acts of genuine kindness could reverberate in ways unseen, shaping destinies quietly, profoundly, irrevocably. As they left the cafe together, the city seemed less imposing, less indifferent. The streets were still long, the night still cold, but the air carried a subtle warmth, the kind that lingers when hope takes root. The man walked taller, his steps steadier, as if the weight of invisibility had been partially lifted. She stayed close, neither speaking, yet both feeling the shift in their worlds. A few blocks later, she paused at an intersection. The hum of traffic filled the silence, the neon lights casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the wet pavement. Without a word, she gestured toward a side street, indicating that this was where their paths would diverge for now. He looked at her, gratitude etched deeply into his features, and nodded, understanding that what had begun tonight was only the first chapter of a new life. She watched him walk away, disappearing into the shadows of the city, and felt an unshakable sense of fulfillment. She knew she had acted not out of obligation, not for recognition, but out of something far older, far more human, a recognition that every life, however battered, held potential, and that the simple act of seeing another person could change everything. The wind picked up, rustling leaves along the sidewalk, carrying with it the faint echo of possibilities. Somewhere deep within, she sensed that the miracle they had begun tonight would unfold in ways neither could yet imagine, shaping lives, altering paths, and creating ripples of hope that might extend far beyond their understanding. And as the night embraced the city once more, a quiet truth settled over them both, that even in a world often governed by indifference, compassion remains a force capable of reshaping destiny, one encounter at a time. The man rose with the first light of dawn, the sun spilling warmth through the modest window of his small room. The faint scent of polished wood and clean linens greeted him, unfamiliar yet comforting. He moved carefully, letting his eyes rest on the familiar details of the space. The simple bed, the small wooden table, the single chair, and the neatly stacked notebooks he had begun filling with reflections and plans. Each object, ordinary on its own, now carried the weight of possibility. Breakfast was quiet, a humble meal he prepared himself, Each bite, each sip of tea, reminded him that hunger no longer defined his days. He lingered over the food, savoring the warmth, the sustenance, and the comfort it represented. For the first time in months, the act of eating was not mere survival. It was a reclaiming of dignity, a recognition that he had been given the chance to live fully once more. Stepping outside, the city greeted him with its usual rhythm, but he perceived it differently now. The streets, once oppressive and indifferent, now held stories, patterns, and subtle connections. The vendor arranging his stall, the children laughing as they chased one another, the pedestrian pausing to help a stranger, all these moments became markers of human potential. He walked with awareness, noting that every interaction held the capacity to change a life, as his own had been changed by a single encounter. His work, organized by the woman who had saved him, demanded effort and attention. Tasks that had once intimidated him were now challenges he approached methodically. Mistakes were no longer sources of shame, but opportunities to learn. His colleagues, initially reserved, began to trust and respect him. Their acknowledgement bolstered his confidence, reinforcing a realization that he had long avoided. He was capable, resilient, and deserving of trust. The woman visited intermittently, her presence quiet but affirming. She offered guidance only when necessary, never imposing her will, her faith in him evident without words. Each visit reinforced the foundation of self-belief she had helped him build. Over time, he internalized that confidence, understanding that validation could be gentle, consistent, and transformative. As weeks turned into months, his life became a series of small, meaningful victories. Financial stability grew steadily. He saved cautiously, invested in essentials, and discovered the satisfaction of independence. He also began to notice others who struggled as he once had. One afternoon, he encountered a young man sitting on a curb, eyes hollow and shoulders hunched. He approached without hesitation, offering food, warmth, and presence. The boy's hesitant acceptance mirrored his own first encounter with the woman, reminding him of the fragile spark of hope that can transform a life. Each day brought incremental growth. He walked the streets with steady steps, engaged in his work with purpose, and carried the quiet awareness that life could be rebuilt. The city, once a backdrop of fear and scarcity, now seemed full of possibility and connection. He realized that the act of being seen, of having someone believe in him without condition, had changed not only his circumstances, but also his perception of the world. Evenings were spent in reflection. He documented his journey in the notebooks he had begun keeping, recording lessons, gratitude, and insights. These writings became a testament to the invisible forces that had guided him. The kindness of a stranger, the chain of empathy and trust that led to his renewed life. He wrote of the night when his hunger and despair met her recognition, of the courage it took for both of them to act in that fleeting moment, and of the enduring power of such gestures. He began to extend the same compassion he had received to others. Neighbors, passers-by, and even those he barely knew experienced his quiet generosity. Sometimes it was food, other times guidance, or simply acknowledgement. Each act was deliberate, measured, and sincere, carrying forward the same invisible chain of kindness that had lifted him. Time passed, seasons shifted, and his life continued to evolve. Each day reinforced the understanding that miracles often arrive quietly, through ordinary means and unexpected channels. The city, bustling and indifferent, became a landscape of opportunity, resilience, and human connection. The man navigated it with a confidence he had never known, aware of his own capacity to influence and heal, and of the unseen impact of small acts of compassion. He reflected on the woman's role in his life frequently, understanding the profound magnitude of her choice to act. She had not only altered his trajectory materially, but she had rekindled a sense of self-worth, a belief in his own potential, and a recognition of the power of empathy. Her actions had created ripples that would extend beyond what either could have anticipated, shaping not just his life, but the lives he touched in turn. As he walked through the city one evening, he noticed shadows shifting in doorways, figures passing silently in need, much as he had been. He approached each encounter with the same gentle attentiveness he had once received. A warm meal, a guiding word, a patient ear, small, deliberate interventions that, he understood, could alter the course of someone's life just as his own had been altered. His reflection deepened with each passing day. The man realized that while his life had been changed by a single act of recognition, it was sustained and amplified through his own choices, his own willingness to engage, and his own courage to act with empathy. He understood that the real miracle lay not merely in receiving kindness, but in becoming a conduit for it, extending hope and dignity outward in perpetuity. Months of stability and growth allowed him to pursue deeper goals. Skills once dormant were nurtured, relationships were cultivated, and he began to see a future that extended far beyond survival. He joined initiatives in the community, helped others navigate their own struggles, and became a quiet pillar of resilience and support. Each success was a testament not only to his effort, but to the chain of human generosity that had first lifted him. And though he faced inevitable challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt, the foundation of faith and self-belief established through that pivotal encounter remained unshakable. He understood that life was rarely linear, that hardship and opportunity coexisted, but that the choice to act with courage, compassion, and integrity could determine whether one remained in despair or rose to fulfillment. The man's life had become a quiet rhythm of purpose and reflection. Each morning, he awoke not to fear or emptiness, but to the subtle promise of possibility. The room he had once entered with uncertainty now felt like home, imbued with the warmth of regained dignity and hope. He moved through his days with deliberate attention, aware of every small action and its potential impact. At the cafe, he worked alongside others who had become his colleagues and friends. They had come to trust his judgment, rely on his steadiness, and respect the patience he extended to both tasks and people alike. He no longer hesitated at responsibility. He embraced it, understanding that the smallest choices could ripple outward, touching lives beyond immediate perception. He reflected often on the woman who had changed his life. Her faith in him, extended without question or condition, had ignited a transformation that went far beyond the material aid she provided. She had restored his belief in himself, reminded him of his worth, and allowed him to experience the profound dignity of being seen. Her influence was present in every decision he made, every gesture of kindness he offered, and every interaction that required patience, empathy, or understanding. One day, as he walked home from work, he encountered a family huddled near a corner of the street, faces etched with worry and fatigue. In their eyes, he saw the reflection of his own past struggles. Without hesitation, he offered food, warm words, and a patient ear. The gratitude in their faces mirrored the relief he had once felt, and in that moment, he understood the true power of paying forward what he had been given. The cycle of compassion continued, extending far beyond the original act that had sparked it. Months passed, and his life continued to unfold in layers of stability, growth, and connection. He found joy not only in personal accomplishment, but in observing the positive impact of his presence on others. Simple interactions, a smile shared, a hand extended, guidance offered, became acts of profound significance, reminders of the enduring power of empathy and kindness. In quiet evenings, he often returned to his journals, recording his experiences, reflections, and lessons learned. He wrote about the night that had begun it all, the cold streets, the flickering lights, the woman's gaze that had held recognition without judgment. Each word carried the weight of gratitude, the acknowledgement that his life had been irrevocably altered, and the commitment to honor that gift through action. He also reflected on the resilience required to navigate a world often indifferent or harsh. While his circumstances had improved dramatically, he knew that life could still present challenges. Yet the foundation built through compassion, self-belief, and perseverance allowed him to meet difficulties with patience, resourcefulness, and quiet courage. He had learned that true strength was not measured by wealth or status, but by the capacity to act with integrity and empathy even in the face of adversity. The woman remained a silent presence in his life, occasionally checking in to offer guidance or encouragement. She witnessed the unfolding of the transformation she had helped initiate, and in observing him, she was reminded of the extraordinary influence one person can have through a single, conscientious act. Her gesture had created ripples far beyond what either of them could have imagined, shaping lives, inspiring hope, and illustrating the enduring potential of human kindness. He began to envision the future with clarity and intention. Goals that once seemed unattainable were now within reach, supported by steady effort and the belief that he could shape his own path. He sought not only to improve his own life, but to leave a meaningful mark on his community, offering support and guidance to those navigating circumstances similar to those he had overcome. The transformation was profound yet subtle. Where he had once moved through the city with caution and invisibility, he now walked with confidence and presence. His gaze, steady and observant, reflected both awareness and compassion. His actions were deliberate, motivated by understanding and a desire to contribute rather than merely survive. One afternoon, he encountered a young woman struggling with a heavy load, her face etched with exhaustion and worry. Without hesitation, he offered assistance, carrying her burden for a distance and speaking words of encouragement. The relief and gratitude in her expression mirrored the profound difference that recognition and support could make, reinforcing the principle that kindness, when extended, creates lasting impact. As months turned into years, his life became a testament to the quiet, persistent power of empathy. Each act of generosity, each demonstration of patience or understanding, became a thread in a larger tapestry of influence and connection. His story, once marked by despair and invisibility, now carried hope, resilience, and the affirmation that lives can be transformed by the simplest of gestures. In the evenings, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He thought of the cold night when she had first extended her help, of the profound trust implicit in that single act, and of the ripple effect it had created. He understood that the true miracle had not been the meal, the work, or the shelter, but the acknowledgement of his humanity and potential. That recognition had become the catalyst for his transformation, empowering him to reclaim his life and extend the same gift to others. Eventually, he made a quiet commitment to continue the chain of compassion, understanding that each interaction offered the potential to change a life. He mentored, supported, and assisted others whenever possible, embodying the lesson that kindness begets kindness. Each act, however small, contributed to the ongoing story of human connection and resilience. Seasons passed, and he found a profound sense of fulfillment in the life he had rebuilt. Every day brought opportunities for contribution, growth, and reflection. The memory of that pivotal night remained central to his consciousness, guiding him in choices both large and small, and reminding him that miracles often arrive quietly, through ordinary acts of care and attention. And for those who have witnessed this story, remember that even the smallest gesture can spark extraordinary change. If this story has touched your heart or restored your faith in humanity, make sure to subscribe to Blessed Soul Stories. Here, we share tales that celebrate compassion, resilience, and the miracles that arise when hearts act with love. Click subscribe and join us for more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of the extraordinary power of human kindness.